Good morning again, everybody. This is What Was Pearl Harbor? Yesterday we read the intro and chapter 1. Today we're starting on chapter 2. A dangerous and risky plan. As tensions rose between Japan and the United States, some American leaders feared a Japanese attack somewhere in the Pacific, probably in the Philippines. Almost no one thought the Japanese would dare to attack Pearl Harbor. Three things seemed to make Pearl Harbor attack-proof. 1. The mighty Pacific Fleet was based there. Surely any attack would be crushed right away. 2. Torpedoes could not be used there. Torpedoes were cigar-shaped missiles dropped from airplanes. They fired into the hulls of ships below the waterline. The waters on Pearl Harbor, however, were shallow. Torpedoes would get stuck in the mud and fail to explode. 3. Pearl Harbor was 4,000 miles from Japan. A surprise attack seemed impossible. Planes or ships would certainly be spotted long before they could strike. The Japanese understood these dangers. Most of their military leaders discarded the idea of attacking Pearl Harbor, all except one. He was Admiral Hiroshige Yamamoto, an important officer in the Imperial Navy. Admiral Yamamoto did not believe that Japan could win a long war against the United States. He had lived in America for several years and had seen the power of its economy and military close up. Nonetheless, Yamamoto did think that Japan could win an all-important first strike against the United States, if it came as a surprise. A first strike at Pearl Harbor could deal a crushing blow to the U.S. fleet. America would not be able to strike back for many months. In the meantime, Japan would be free to take over the South Pacific. That would break the enemy's will to fight, Yamamoto said. Yamamoto's idea was dangerous and risky. Nonetheless, the military gave him the go-ahead to put a plan together. Yamamoto gathered a team of engineers and military leaders. They came up with a very different kind of attack plan, something that had never been tried before. Up until then, great naval battles were fought in the open sea. Huge battleships pounded each other with warheads shot from cannons. But in Yamamoto's plan, the attack would come from the air. Planes would take off from huge aircraft carriers. An aircraft carrier is basically a floating airport. It can transport hundreds of planes across the sea. The long, flat upper deck of a carrier provides a runway for takeoffs and landings. Yamamoto's master plan called for several carriers to bring hundreds of planes within flying distance of Pearl Harbor. The strike force would include bombers and fighter planes, and the key weapon would be a torpedo that worked in shallow water. Yamamoto's team came up with the smart idea of putting wooden fins on torpedoes. The fins could make the torpedoes turn towards a target almost as soon as it hit the water. With the torpedo problem solved, the Japanese now could rip gashes into the hulls of U.S. battleships and destroy them. Admiral Yamamoto, 1884 to 1943. 57-year-old Admiral Yamamoto was the mastermind behind the Pearl Harbor attack. Yamamoto lived for a while in the United States, first as a student at Harvard University, and later as a Japanese official in Washington, D.C. During those years, he developed a deep respect for America. When World War II broke out, he had concerns about Japan siding with Germany. He thought it would lead to a war with the United States, a war that Japan could not win. Yamamoto believed air power was the way to win wars now. He even foresaw the sea battle could be won by firing at ships from the air. Before, battles at sea meant big ships fighting against other big ships. Yamamoto oversaw the building of a massive air fleet in Japan. By 1941, the Japanese had nearly 5,000 warplanes. His planning for the Pearl Harbor attack proved to be brilliant. Yamamoto was tracked and killed by the U.S. Army troops in 1943 for his part in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Chapter 3, Top Secret. The attack was top secret right from the start. Japanese fighter pilots had months of training, but they didn't know what they were training for. They were kept in the dark until right before the attack was set in motion. Very few in the Japanese military knew about the plan either. For many months, not even Emperor Hirohito was told. Neither was the mild-mannered Japanese ambassador in Washington, D.C. He learned about the attack after it happened. By mid-November, the Japanese fleet was ready to depart. But how could giant aircraft carriers leave Japan without being seen by U.S. spies? The answer? They did not leave in a group. The warship began leaving Japan one at a time, by separate routes to escape attention. Eventually, all the ships would meet up at a remote island north of Japan. The route was through rough, icy seas. This made it less likely that they'd be spotted by ships from other countries. Radios were turned off. Now, U.S. Navy planes could not pick up their signals. Oil tankers chugged behind the fleet so that the warships never had to stop in ports to refuel. The Japanese fleet numbered some 30 ships in all. There were 6 aircraft carriers bearing hundreds of warplanes. The other ships came along to protect the carriers or to refuel them. There was also a fleet of submarines in the convoy. The submarines were the only vessels that would be going all the way to Pearl Harbor. 5 of the submarines carried midget subs. Before dawn on the day of the attack, the midgets were supposed to slip inside the harbor. They would lie on the dark harbor bottom until the bombing began. Then the tiny sub would open fire attack the U.S. ships from underwater. The commander in charge of the ships at sea was Vice Admiral Nagumo. He knew that there was a chance the attack could still be called off. If Japan and the United States reached an agreement, his orders were to return to the homeland. This is Admiral Nagumo. However, an agreement seemed less likely every day. Washington continued talks, not knowing that Japan was talking peace and planning war. President Roosevelt offered to lift the trade embargo if Japan withdrew its troops from Indochina. That idea made Japan furious. On December 1st, Japanese military leaders met with the emperor to urge him to go to war. Prime Minister Tojo grimly reported, "Matters have reached the point where Japan must begin war. To preserve her empire," the emperor agreed. The next day, Nagumo received a message. "Climb Mount Nitaka," it said. Mount Nitaka was the highest mountain in the Japanese Empire. The message was a secret way of saying proceed, attack Pearl Harbor. Chapter 4. While most people at Pearl Harbor were sleeping, Commander Masuto Fuchida prepared for battle. Fuchida donned a red shirt. If bullets hit him, the shirt would hide signs of blood from his troops. The Japanese fleet had stopped 230 miles north of Hawaii. From the spot, attack planes would take off from the carriers in 2 waves, an hour apart. Fuchida saw with alarm that the seas were very rough, dangerous for takeoff. Water burst over the decks of the carriers, which rocked back and forth. Crews desperately hung to the planes on the deck to stop from falling overboard. But the day of battle had come, and there was no turning back. Shortly after 6 a.m., Fuchida gave the order to take off. One by one, airplanes from all 6 carriers roared into the sky. The pilots circled until 183 planes were in the air. Fuchida was in the lead plane. The other pilots followed behind him. Pearl Harbor was 90 minutes away. At Oahu, a small ship called the USS Ward was on early morning patrol near the entrance to Pearl Harbor. At 6:45, lookouts suddenly spotted something sticking out of the water. It looked like a buoy, but it wasn't. It was the conning tower of an enemy submarine. "Commence firing," the patrol boat commander ordered. His crew fired at the sub, first with guns and then with deep charges, which are underwater bombs. The submarine exploded in a gush of foam. Although they did not know it then, the sailors had just sunk a Japanese midget submarine. Without delay, the commander radioed in a report of the sinking. The message went slowly from one office to the next. Finally, it reached headquarters. The report caused quite a stir, said one witness. However, officers thought it was not important enough to put the whole fleet on alert, and no action was taken. Another danger sign quickly followed at 7:02. Two young privates were on duty at a lonely radar station in the northern tip of Oahu. Suddenly, a huge blip appeared on the radar screen. It looked like a group of 50 or more planes was just 140 miles away. One of the soldiers grabbed the phone and reported the sighting. An officer listened to the news, but he remembered that several U.S. planes were due in that morning from California. He figured those planes accounted for the blip on the radar screen. "Don't worry about it," he said. Twice danger signals were spotted, and twice they were ignored. Later, the military would deeply regret those mistakes. Meanwhile, the first wave of Japanese fighter planes drew steadily closer to Oahu. By 7:30, the second wave of planes was also in the air. Altogether, there were 353 enemy planes. Everything was going according to plan. Still, Commander Fushida had reason to worry. A cloud cover lay over the island. That would make it hard for his pilots to find their targets. Then, suddenly, the clouds broke. The coast appeared below, and it could be a clear day after all, perfect for an air attack. Fushida saw the U.S. battleships up ahead. A more favorable situation could not have been imagined, he later wrote. Fushida radioed his pilots, 222, attack, attack, attack. It was 7:49 a.m. These are pictures from the actual attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese planes taking off. The U.S. trying to put out flames on the ship. An aerial view of Battleship Row, which is what they called Pearl Harbor. And sailors honoring killed men. The USS Arizona burning and sinking. Torpedo planes attacking. There's the military band. This is the USS Arizona Memorial that's actually still at Pearl Harbor today. Their sleeping quarters on a Navy battleship. All 40 torpedo bombers flew toward the U.S. battleship. Behind them were high-level bombers. Other groups of planes tore off to the airfields. Fuchida scanned the skies. All he saw were his own planes. No American aircraft were rushing to defend the Pacific Fleet. "Toro, Toro, Toro!" Fuchida radioed the Japanese Navy. "Tiger, Tiger, Tiger." The code word meant that they had made it into the harbor in secret. So far, so good. Way of the Warrior. Before Japanese troops left for Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto reminded them to stay true to their Bushido code. This ancient code laid out strict rules of conduct for warriors. They had to be loyal, do their duty, show courage and self-control, and be ready to die for Japan. Bushido warriors valued honor over their own lives. Bushido warriors also wore certain items of clothing in battle. On the morning of December 7th, pilots tied scarves around their heads. On each scarf was a flaming red dot. It stood for the rising sun, which was the symbol of Japan. The Japanese word for certain victory was sewn into each scarf. Around their waist, some of the pilots tied a belt of 1,000 stitches for good luck. The belts were made by Japanese women, each sewing one stitch until there were 1,000. Tomorrow we will start with chapter 5. Have a good day.